He's always got the time.
Is that because of his... I can't say that. He's got a watch. Have you seen the size of his
Zoom
watch?
into his watch. It's a great watch, but he's always got the time.
Tonight, I sit down with a footballer who was thrown into the Melbourne Football Club during the most fascinating of times. His on-field career ended up a little shorter than he hoped, but the memories he keeps are certainly worthy of this platform. I hope you enjoy episode 5 with Cale Morton. Cale, thanks very much for jumping on the pod. You're my first guest that I hadn't actually met before, but we've had a bit of time to chat. I really appreciate you coming down.
Mate, it's a pleasure to be here. And although we hadn't met, I have done my research on you, and everyone I've spoken to speaks really highly of you. So it's an easy decision for me.
Appreciate the kind words. I've done my research as well. Hopefully we uncover some gold and this could take off.
I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing if you've done your research. Hopefully your research ends at about 2009.
When the career began?
Yeah, no, that's
just a year after.
It's all downhill from there.
All right, so it's been, 11, 12 years since we've last seen you at AFL level. What's life been like for you?
Mate, so finished up 5 years with Melbourne, which was some of the best years of my adult life. And then I had a year over at West Coast, which was sort of plagued by injury a bit. Also probably wasn't good enough, to be honest. And then went and played a couple of years 1 year in the Waffle, 1 year in the VFL, and then called it quits. I went out to a town called Diggers Rest that play in the Riddle District League. Played there for 7 years. We won 2 flags. So that's sort of a bit of a spike at the end of the career, which was great. Finished playing footy, now work and I'm a partner at an education company called Entry Education. So we do real estate training courses and finance courses all through Australia.
Yeah, great. And has the passion for footy stayed?
Mate, I love the Ds. I'm still a passionate supporter. I think I was telling you before, prior to playing in the AFL, I was a Richmond supporter for no particular reason. And then going to Melbourne and learning the history of the club and all of the sort of, the characters that have been a part of the narrative, in a sense, all of the people in significant times in their history, and learning more about it. It's just made me more of I love Melbourne more when I was there. So follow Melbourne to this day, love the Ds. Going through a bit of a rocky patch at the moment, but I'm sure we'll turn it around.
Was there any resentment at all after leaving, or what were your feelings like initially?
So look, I played for 6 years and was traded after 5. So it's sort of like leaving high school at the end of year 11 and then going over the road and joining another high school for year 12. So all of your mates think you're jumping ship and you sort of don't talk to all your ex-teammates. I would have loved to have finished at Melbourne and then been more involved with the past players stuff, which I would like to get a bit more involved with moving forward. But there's always been that awkwardness. While I'm 34, there's still some players there that I played with. So I think once all they finish up and I can go there as a past player with no of my former teammates there, I think I'll get around it.
Is there any connection at all from players you were playing with, or like any mates that have formed?
There is. So Jack Watts and I, we keep in touch sporadically. We did the Channel 9 Sunday footy show recently, which was good fun. I'm still chasing Brad Green for a beer. He told me about 5 years ago that he wanted to catch up. So I'm actually here today because I'm following him. He won't reply to my calls, text messages. So Brad Green, if you're watching, I'm still waiting for that beer, mate.
Definitely a big listener, I reckon.
Well, I saw him on last week.
Exactly.
Or recently. So now hopefully I'll hear back from him.
You mentioned Jack Watts. I want to ask about his debut. So Queen's birthday, it was a massive occasion. It almost felt like a marketing ploy to everyone that was involved at the time. What was it like seeing the young 18-year-old Jack Watts being thrown on that big stage?
Yeah.
We know he got crunched at the very beginning.
It was plain and simply what it seemed like was a marketing ploy, but he was a great young player. So his opportunity had to come at some time. He debuted in the Queen's birthday, which was Melbourne's, and probably still is Melbourne's biggest game of the year, although the Anzac Day Eve game, is that when that one against Richmond's played? So it seemed like that at the time, but also Pick One hadn't played until then. It was probably the right time to play him, but I can't remember what sort of form he was in. Nonetheless, he got crunched in that first tackle, and that was bloody funny. I felt for him, for everything contextually that went into that moment. And like me, some of us get remembered for some incidents throughout the career more so than others. But I felt for him a lot. I mean, I saw the funny side, but I also thought, he's an 18-year-old making his debut. I think 3 Collingwood players tackled him. It wouldn't have been a great feeling. But it's hard to come back from that. But to his credit, he stuck around for many, many years and played some really good footy after that.
So you've alluded to the moment. I've got it ready to go. I wasn't going to bring it up this early, but
what have you got for me?
What are your feelings when people say the words Brendon Lade?
Well, I actually I enjoy it. I find this so entertaining. In fact, speaking to Kane Corns recently, he actually told me that at half time, I think I'd had 15 to 20 touches and kicked a goal. So there was a clear directive from the coach that in the third quarter or whenever that was, to sort of not let me...
Stop Cale Morton's influence.
Just to not let me... it might have been quarter time, I'm not sure. Just he's a young kid, he's 18, he's had 10, 15, he's kicked a goal. Let's get after him. And Brendon Lade had 7 touches that day. I've had 28 and kicked 1 or 2. So I think poor Brendon Lade is a big sort of driver behind that moment. His mindset, it wasn't necessarily so much as running away, but if you play the extended footage, which I still haven't got my hands on, but from memory, I'm thinking I got the ball again. So while I see it as entertainment and can understand the funny side of it, in the heat of the moment, you just don't run away from people. It's quite, it's not a dangerous sport from the point of view of standing toe-to-toe and getting punched. Most of the impact collisions come when you least expect them. So to see it, I still enjoy it. It's quite funny. The video on YouTube is up to something like 300,000 views. So
Viral.
I still hear about it to this day, which is very funny.
Are you sick of talking about it at all? Like, it's somewhat what you're remembered for. Is that annoying?
So the thing is, I think over time it's become a bit more funny. I mean, when I was playing, I hardly saw it. Yeah. In fact, I was on a holiday in Thailand and the Channel 9 or someone tried to get hold of me to receive Tool of the Year. And I was away, so I couldn't do it. If I had have accepted the award and it was played again, it would have probably become a bit more of a thing while I was playing. But I was actually, luckily or unluckily, away overseas and couldn't do it. But it's become a bit more prominent since I've finished playing, which is funny. But there's a couple of other highlights on the reel, but they're not as well viewed or as liked as that one.
I've got a photo. I went through the archives and I found a photo of you and Barry Hall going toe to toe.
Yeah.
Do you remember that moment?
Mate, I don't remember being that skinny and having abs, but you might have to send me that one. That's actually a very funny photo. That was a practice match at Princes Park, and from memory, I'd taken a mark, just a general mark and kick, and then run past him and thought I'd just sort of test the waters a bit, and I gave him a little bump, and then he told me to come back, and I've obviously gone back and seen what he would do to me, and that's how we ended up. That's quite unfortunate. Probably get a week for that today.
Yeah, you're probably right. The physicality of footy, you sort of spoke about it. The more danger comes when you least expect it. Did you, obviously we've seen players now retire with concussion and things like that. Did you have any fears at the time? You were a skinny kid.
Oh, look, my footy was mostly played on the outskirts of the oval.
Yeah, the nice wing.
So it wasn't a highly contested game, but in fact it was by design. I had certain attributes and skills that I played, which I considered my strengths. So most of my junior footy being, winning the beep test at the draft camp and being the fittest player on the AFL list in my early days boded well to an uncontested style of game. So I never had any issues with head knocks or, you don't have to look hard to see I wasn't the world's greatest tackler. But it's sad to see what's happening now. In fact, you don't need to be a hard nut or a contested ball player tackler to get hit and to have a bad incident that can change your life. So I expect to see in the future some initiatives, and I know someone who's working on something at the moment where we can protect the head a bit more through potential equipment that isn't too cumbersome. So I'll be interested to see what happens in the coming years and what the AFL or the football world in general can do to prevent it, because it's becoming a bit of an issue, and rightly so, because it can impact you for a while.
So you played 76 games across your career. Going into a career pick 4 in the draft, you probably have your sights set on more. It sounds ridiculous that 76 games could potentially feel like a failure to you, but how do you feel about it when looking back?
Yeah, so I came into the AFL with so much hope and expectation of myself. I'd just come out of that under-18 National Carnival and won the medal for the best player. And I'd gone to Melbourne and was performing quite well in the pre-season. My first 40 games over the 2008 and 2009 were great. So I played, I think, 40 out of 44 in the first 2 years, top 5, Rising Sun, I think top 5 both years for Melbourne's best and fairest. And then in my third year in the pre-season, I unfortunately got injured, which isn't an excuse. It happens to everyone. But from that moment, it became more of a challenge. I was 20, 21 years old. The excuse of not being strong and not developing the physical side of my game had sort of worn thin on a few people. And I had not developed in areas that I needed to, which would become pretty clear for the coaching staff that, these are holes in my game that other teams could potentially exploit, strength, body size and things like that. So I felt as though, from a point of view of being a 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old, I thought I was going to play for 15 years, like most people probably would. But then the reality hit me, and it was a lot harder from the third, fourth year onwards to establish myself as a player while developing areas of my game that I was not so good at. So, the tackling, the contested ball side of things, I could always find the footy, but it was as a result of being extremely fit and quite an intelligent footballer. So there were other areas that the coaches would have preferred me focus on, and rightly so, that I wasn't so good at. So after the age of 20, 21, it was pretty well downhill from there.
How do you feel about the career looking back now? Are there frustrations left with it ending there? Or?
Mate, incredibly proud. Believe it or not, just don't feel like there was a stone unturned. I did everything I did, and I wouldn't change anything. The one thing you realise is when you move on life after footy, you see another crop of players getting drafted, and every year there's turnover of lists. It's essentially a numbers game. Only so few people are lucky enough to stay at a football club for 10, 12, 13, 14 years, and they're the absolute legends of the game. And it's not everyone, it's a very small percent. So to even get a taste of the AFL, I learnt so much about myself as a person. I'm applying to everyday life now. I've been successful in my career in the education industry. I've established myself in a business. I'm contributing in ways where my input is, valuable because of everything I've learned in my life, including the AFL. So I don't sort of regret anything. In fact, I'm super proud. I was lucky to play in the AFL with some fantastic people for a great football club. And I look back on it with fond memories, to be honest, which might surprise people, but I genuinely wouldn't change anything. I felt as though, I got out of it what I could. I look back on it and it was a great time in my life.
I think it's a great attitude to have towards it. One downfall was, unfortunately, the win-loss record. You only managed 18 wins in those 76 games. Did that make it harder to enjoy the footy? Did the club almost get to a point where it's like, I'm rocking up expecting to lose, let's just deal with it?
It's one of the challenges of, obviously the way the draft works is the teams at the bottom get the early picks, and the way it worked out, I went pick 4. Melbourne had obviously finished 4th bottom the year before, unless there was a priority pick. But the way that it inevitably works out is you do go early, you go to a club that's rebuilding or that are down the bottom of the ladder, which is a bit annoying in a sense. I mean, it's designed that way. But I think we've found over time now that where you go in the draft doesn't really reflect how good you're going to be as a player. If I had my time again, I would love to have gone later in the draft and gone under the radar a bit and seen what would have happened with a bit more time to develop my game. I see so many players that went mid-range in the draft. I think there's 300 game players who went pick, 30, 25, 30. Still side bottom, I think, is one of those guys. So it's, as a young player coming up, you focus so much of your attention on being the best player you can be, showing every skill set you've got to the recruiters and going early in the draft. But as a wise ex-player, you look back on that and think, do you know what? It doesn't matter where you go in the draft. If you end up at a good club and you apply yourself, you'll get everything out of it that you can. And sometimes, I think more than others, you can end up having a pretty successful career as just someone who sneaks into the, goes under the radar into the draft, I think.
Your first 2 games, 104-point loss, 95-point loss. So
Yeah.
you were thrown straight into the losing culture, essentially. What was that like?
Yeah, so it wasn't much fun, to be honest with you. Like, a lot of the Monday reviews were horrific. It sort of got to a point at Melbourne where on the Monday you'd go in for the review and the coaches would just try something different. So sometimes we'd go in there and it'd be like, oh, today there's no review, or today we're just going to absolutely have a go at everyone and tee off at anything we saw in the game. It was like a roller coaster. When you're obviously at a successful club, the reviews can be much more placid and consistent, but it was so volatile in a sense where you got to a Monday review and you're like, oh, what are we in for today? And that happened because of the nature of the losses. A coaching group is probably trying everything within their powers to turn it around, and there's just many different ways you can go about it. So I saw a lot of that at Melbourne in my first few years, but at West Coast as well, they had a terrible year when I was there. So maybe it's me, I'm not sure. But mate, some of the down times at a football club can be really low times, not just individually, but for a team. And you look back at the impact that can have on a club's history. That period at Melbourne still lingers around a bit today, where everyone remembers how bad they were. So it's when 2 bad losses turn into 3, into 6, into 10. When you start getting up to that sort of 6, 8, 10 really bad losses in a season, that can be a period in history that'll be remembered for a long time, and that's not good for a football club.
Did you cop personally any memorable sprays through that time?
I'm sure I would have copped a few, but the people that I played with will remember I was quite a quick-thinking, witty young guy. So whether it was a one-on-one with a coach or in the playing group, I tended to have a pretty good reply. Obviously, you can't do that in a game team review, but I sort of would have copped from memory my fair share of sprays, but I had a funny way of just sort of, it was like water off a duck's back, and I'd have something to say, regrettably now. But there was also a lot of sprays, a lot of people hanging over the fence, not just in the AFL, but local footy as well. It was probably worse. Passionate supporters will always bring up the most deepest sort of, stupid thing that you don't even think of. And there's some pretty funny insults getting around to not just me, but all players.
Did it get to a stage in those early years where obviously you're a recognisable figure, Melbourne's a passionate sporting sort of community, did you not want to be going to cafes, or was it okay to be approached?
I was the opposite. I was at CQ every Saturday night getting the free drinks. I enjoyed, the first couple of years and everything that came with it as a young footballer getting into the game. It was all just, you look back on it now and I think clubs are getting better at sort of, there's not as much of probably what we did. We went out and enjoyed ourselves a lot, and a team bonding session would often be a big piss up. It was a bit more like local footy back then, where you could just go out and have a huge night and then all of your problems would go away and everyone would be best mates again. Whereas these days it's a bit more scientific than that, I think, and there's a bit more time and thought going into how to manage cultural workplace type stuff.
You speak of free drinks. What were the biggest perks? Were there things at the time that...
Mate, the perks, well, it's hard to remember now because it's been a long time since any of these perks have come my way. There was a sponsorship there with Reebok when I started. That moved over to Puma, which was great. There was the nightclubs. The CQ was a big one with the 5 drink cards. I still remember that guy. I think his name was Dale. Outside of that, mate, nothing too significant.
That era, it was, as you said, like a dark time at stages. Yeah. There was the famous Richmond tanking game. To show that you were a good player, you played 21 out of 22 games that year.
Yeah.
Guess which game you missed? That
was actually something that I thought about recently, and I'm like, at that time, I was considered one of the better players for Melbourne. Quite remarkable, really. That in itself is an accomplishment. I'd done the pre-game media with my brother Mitch. We'd done something at the MCG, and I got a call from the coaching group saying, we're going to rest you tomorrow. And I'm 19 years old going, I'm not that significant. But if, looking back on it, I'm like, what were they thinking? Maybe they thought I was Chris Judd. But it did happen. I was in the stands watching it, and it was comical, watching the moves from the coaching box. Obviously, Melbourne couldn't win the game, right? I don't know what happened legally for this, so Don't quote me. But, you know, we had, I think Nathan Brown from Richmond was playing on Paul Johnson from Melbourne, the ruckman. Nathan Brown being the small left-footed forward. And all sorts of different moves all over the ground that we were up there in the stands, a couple of us just going, oh, I hope the camera's not on us. But nah, look, it's funny you say that. Like, that's sort of where I was at that time. Everything was going well. We, some of us were rested, made us feel like absolute legends. But it all came crashing down not long after.
What was it like watching that game? Like, I'm guessing the players out there are still trying. Like, it's hard not to try.
No.
So how did you go watching from the stands when
it was hard. No matter what is the outcome of win, loss or draw, 22 people will always go out there trying to win. It's like with football training, and this happens across all levels of sport, not just football. When you play the A grade team against the B grade team at training, the B grade team are always super competitive and nearly almost upset the A grade team. It's this connotation of there's a challenge, and it's not just trying to win, it's trying to compete and prove that we're better. So no one can ever go out there intentionally trying to lose. I'm certain it's never happened in the history of the AFL. But it's nearly impossible to say, hey, let's go out and lose this game, because it will never happen. You can't find 22 people that are professional athletes that would go out there intentionally trying to lose. But looking back on it, yeah, it was quite a funny sort of event in the history of the club. Some of the moves, as I said, mate, it was just getting quite funny by the fourth quarter.
The next coach came along, Mark Neeld. There's been obviously different sort of opinions of his time. I think he only got 33 games of coaching in the end. You had 1 year with him. What was the Neeld era like for you?
I thought he was not qualified properly for the job, to be honest with you. To take a risk on a coach like that, you know, his performance and his ability to impact the playing group, you know, look back on it, I don't need to describe it. It happened. We know it. We saw it. And it was pretty average. But I do remember when he came into the football club, he sat down he had meetings with each individual players, and he would tell them, I don't rate you. He'd say, I don't think you're a good player. And he said that to a few of us at the time, me included, before he'd ever run a coaching session or done a meeting with the group. And I'll never forget thinking, this is a bizarre way to coach a football club, but I'm all in. Mate, if you don't rate me, that's your strategy to tell me that, I hope this works. Obviously backfired, but he was an unusual person. And I think what he did is he came into the football club trying to turn the place around, and he focused so hard on making an impact. Coaching is a long game. It doesn't happen overnight. It's more of a 3, 4, 5 year strategy in most cases that are successful. But he really tried to make an impact. And I'll never forget some of the good young players like myself, Jack Watts, Sam Blees, some of us sort of more talented junior footballers, he had it out for, which was just, it was so abrupt and so, you know, direct. And you're sort of meeting the senior coach at the time. I felt like in hindsight, didn't have a lot of respect for him, to be honest, as a coach. I just didn't, in my mind, think that he had the ability to coach. So we never really got along well. But it wasn't a reason for either of us being unsuccessful. I just think we both probably weren't up to our respective sort of, you know, careers in a sense. So, but bloody funny. I just remember that as you asked when he came in, called a few of us into the meeting. It was unbelievable. Yeah. Never seen anything like that or heard about anything like that ever before.
Interesting approach. When you moved to West Coast, what was the professionalism like there?
Mate, they were both great clubs, both really not great times in their history. So Melbourne had just gone through quite a bad period. I left and went to West Coast, and West Coast had a really bad year. In fact,
it was a weird patch because they were 2 years later in a grand final.
John Worsfold, it was his last year, and I was having player meetings with John Worsfold fortnightly, weekly, while I was returning from injury playing in the Waffle. And I was being held out of the team by some senior players. And then when he announced his resignation, he sort of said to me, unfortunately, I wish I had have played you earlier. And in my mind, it's one of the last things that I could taste in my mouth about football. It was this sense of, maybe I could have played a bit more in different circumstances. And West Coast had 3, maybe 4 retirements that year. And so to go to a club and try and prove yourself when there may have been an obligation from the coach and the footy department to play certain senior players, that was a bit frustrating. But also my form coming back from injury wasn't great to warrant it. But in a different time at West Coast, it might have worked better. But the club is super professional. They are at the top of the game when it comes to technology, training facilities, and everything that's in, with a club with a big bank account can do. But really enjoyed my time there. They're a well-established club in terms of where they're at in the market in Perth. And you spoke about the perks of AFL. I don't think there would be a club in Australia where players get the perks like West Coast in Perth. Mate, they run the show over there. And it's an interesting dynamic in a small city with a club that's so powerful and big. If you're flying and West Coast are flying, there would be no better place to be for a footballer. And I imagine that's probably what it's going to be like for Harley Reid in the next couple of years.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You talk about how well they're set up. We were speaking before that West Coast facilities are incredible. Melbourne, they've got admin on one side of Richmond and footy department on the other. How is Amy Park for you?
Well,
was it Amy Park the whole time?
No. So
Junction,
in my first year, maybe first 1 or 2 years, we're at Junction Oval. And that was in the gym, in the weights room, the floor wasn't even. I mean, that's where they were at that point in time. That went from 0 to 100 when they went to Amy. So Amy Park being the new facility it was at the time was amazing. It was like a breath of fresh air going into new facilities and, oh, wow, we're going to get a bit more professional now. And it had that impact on the playing group. But unfortunately, we had a lot of training sessions. And when I say unfortunately, I don't mean it's not a good thing to go out to Casey because there may have been a contractual obligation for the footy club to do it. But it was like 4 days a week driving out there for main training. So it was frustrating to have Gosh's paddock right there where Collingwood would just walk to train every day and we're driving an hour out to Cranbourne 3-4 times a week for main training sessions in pre-season. But it was funny, the West Coast Footy Club had everything together, and whatever they wanted, they got. Whereas Melbourne was sort of probably trying to configure deals that put them in a better financial position, which just shows the difference of many clubs, but particularly West Coast and Melbourne financially at that time.
We've spoken a lot about the losses in the career. You did win 18 games. That's better than 0. The first win was quite remarkable against Fremantle, known as the Austin Montgomery game, where he's just come from...
Was that my first win?
That was your first win in 2008.
I didn't know that was my first win.
That's remarkable. What was that game like?
Watching yourself and Brad Green on your Instagram account actually reminded me of it. So you're taking over on social media, which I like. That's why I'm here, mate, because exactly. I just want people to scroll all the way down the bottom when you've got a couple of 100,000 followers see me down. But the Melbourne Freo game was remarkable. I think we were down by 54 points, if not at halftime, then maybe late second quarter, early third quarter. I can't remember the exact details. But what happened is we started coming back. We didn't think we could win. We could win physically, but you just don't think you can. And then you start chipping away. And then the crowd gets up and about. And even with a Melbourne crowd of 30 to 40,000 people, they would make so much noise when Melbourne were up and going, even in that 2008, 2009 period when we weren't going so well. And then all of a sudden in the last quarter, Aussie went nuts. And, mate, it felt like there was 120,000 people there. It was an incredible game to be a part of. And some of the old Melbourne players that played in that game, there was Greeny and there was... I think I saw on the footage of Paul Wheatley was there and just some other names and some players that I don't even remember that I played with were playing. Like Russell Robertson. Incredible to share that moment with them and something that, looking back, you probably catch up with them in the future and go, do you remember that game? Which hasn't happened for me yet, but it is one of those moments, that game. It's an incredible game to be a part of.
I've actually got a list here of the side for your debut. And I'm curious to see how many of them you can remember. So,
okay, this will be good.
I'll give you just a few guesses. So, there's obviously 22 players.
Yeah.
We might have to cut this because this could go very wild. But
that's all right.
Can you name 22? We'll give you 22 guesses.
22. I reckon Brad Green, James McDonald, Cameron Bruce, Mark Jamar, Colin Garland.
Jamar actually didn't play.
Jamar didn't play.
Garland
so that
did.
means Paul Johnson played.
Paul
for us.
Johnson played, correct.
David Needs. My first
Yeah,
game.
he did.
Yeah. Russell Robertson would have had to have played.
Correct.
Paul Wheatley.
Correct.
Whelan.
No,
Oh.
not Matty Whelan.
Brent Maloney.
Yep.
Nathan Jones.
Yep.
Clint Bartram. Was he injured?
He did not play, no.
Nathan Carroll.
Yep. What's
Disco.
Nathan Carroll like?
Yeah, no, I got along with him well. I got along with him very well because he was a Claremont boy from over in WA.
Some of the
Interesting guy.
haircuts.
Interesting guy, but down, deep in his heart, lovely, lovely, caring guy. He actually looked after me for a few moments in my first year, and I was like, you know what, he's a great bloke. But, on the TV, he looked crazy. Who else was there? So there was, I'm thinking, James Frawley. Did I mention him?
He didn't play.
Didn't play.
You've got a couple of obvious ones. You got 3 genuine Melbourne greats.
Yeah.
And then there's one that if you can remember, I think he played 2 games, you'd be doing well.
Oh, I remember the guy. Isaac?
Yep.
Yeah, Isaac. Couldn't tell his last name.
Weetra.
We try, yeah, that's right. Who are the
Yeah.
other obscure ones? Give me a clue.
They're not as obscure. You got Mark of the Year.
Michael Newton.
Yep.
Lyndon Dunn.
Dunn didn't play.
Matthew Bate.
Didn't play. He played a lot of games around that time, but didn't play.
Jared Rivers.
Didn't play.
Ricky Pattard.
He did. He punctured his lung, I reckon, the
Yeah,
year later.
yeah.
What was that like?
I didn't think much of it at the time. I remember it happening, but it didn't resonate with me until it happened to me in a game of local footy. I'd punctured my lung and went into the Alfred the following day because I could hear air like bubbling in my throat, and I didn't realise how serious it can be. So now I understand why they puncture you with the pen sometimes to let air back in because it can be fatal.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah, so it's pretty frightening, and I just didn't think that at the time, but
Yeah, right.
very serious. So yeah, there's the other players in this team,
You got 3 greats.
3 grades. Uze,
Yep. There was 2 rucks playing in that game.
Jeff White, did he
Yep,
play?
He played.
Wow, I got to play with some great players. Like it's amazing. Some of these guys are absolute legends of the Melbourne Footy Club, and David Neitz I still see to this day in and around the hospitality scene. He's opened up a pub, Brewmanity,
Yep.
in South Melbourne, and I often see him at Lamaro's where I go, Paul DiMartina's pub, and just even a year with him creates so many memories. So these guys all got to play together for so long. They're all 30 plus, I reckon, there, or nearly. And they would just be able to catch up and have the greatest yarns.
Yeah.
Whereas I was sort of left a bit short on that, but still take a lot out of my career. I mean, being a 300-game player like that, David Neitz would just be amazing.
Yeah. The other one's Daniel Bell.
Oh, yeah.
Simon Buckley.
Oh, yeah. I remember they used to knock around a bit together as well. I would have never got them, but I should have.
And Aaron Davey, the last one.
Oh, he was a star. If you had have asked me the question in another way, and who were the best players that I played with, Aaron Davey would be top 3 in that list. An incredible, most skillful left foot kick I've ever seen play the game. Dan Rich and him, who I've been lucky to play with both of them, can kick the footy like no other people I've ever played footy with at any level. Obviously being in the AFL, being the highest level, but you just don't see anything like that.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
Who else comes to mind for best players you played alongside?
In terms of on-field leaders and, in a sense, leaders of a football club, I thought James McDonald, for his stature, had the ability to lead a team and bring people on his back in the way that he was a great tackler. He was a relatively small player by body stature, but in terms of his output and impact on a football club, I felt like that was quite amazing to see. Aaron Davey for his skillful left foot. And then you've got Cam Bruce and Brad Green, who when I got to the football club, I looked up to so much because I'd followed them quite a lot. In fact, around the time of the AFL draft, I used to tell people that I felt like I played a similar game to Cam Bruce. And I got along with both of those guys really well while I was at the football club. So they're probably the ones that I felt like looking back I remember having an impact in terms of the way they played. But then you had people with skillful ability like Liam Jarrah.
Yeah.
that was quite amazing and very interesting playing with him.
Yeah, you would have loved to see him play 200 games.
Yeah, he could have done anything.
What was he like when he rocked up? He didn't speak much English, did he?
Yeah, it's so hard to remember. I didn't really have much to do with him at all. Quite a unique person, kept to himself. But then when he got out on the football ground, it was like everyone was there to watch the Liam Jurra show. So for someone so secluded and private away from the football ground to go out onto the oval in front of a big crowd and a TV audience to literally perform. When I say perform, not just in his football skills, but what he did when he kicked goals and how his demeanour around the oval was very interesting. It was polar opposites.
I've got one really random one to throw at you. I've heard a lot of stories about the China trip. So Melbourne played Brisbane.
Yeah.
It was just an exhibition match. I've heard mixed stories. What was your experience of China
Mate,
like?
so this is great coming on here because you're reminding me of things that I have not thought about for quite some time. So let me tell you, it was a complete junket. So I think the day before the game we'd even been drinking. I roomed with Watsy on that trip and we had so much fun over there. We thought China was the best place on earth. Not because we were, in China, exploring China, but the way the AFL and the football clubs set up the whole agenda for the 1 or 2 weeks. We were treated like royalty there, and it was one hell of a time. The game itself left a bit to be desired. We were playing on this massive, massive rectangle oval, which must be for soccer grounds or something. And they've played an AFL game there since. It's not great for viewing TV or at the ground. We played Brisbane from memory.
Yep.
I kicked a couple of goals, which was nice.
I actually checked that today. Kicked two.
I wore gold boots. But outside of the game, it was so much fun. Just to do that with the whole football club. I mean, sure, you'd understand, when you get the whole club together, it's always a great time. Bonding, you get so much out of it. But we got to do that for 2 weeks. It brought people closer together. We shared in some unusual experiences. We did an amazing race over there, which I won. I've not yet lost an amazing race. It's my claim to fame. I've done 3. But we did an amazing race through Beijing. We spent time in Shanghai. It was amazing. It was so good. And I've been back to China since as a result of that trip.
Yeah. I heard it got pretty loose.
Yeah, it got loose.
Some weird things happen?
Off the top of my head, I can't really remember. You'll have to remind me.
I'll bring some stuff up off air. I've heard some stories.
No, there was many a story from that, but I don't know what on Instagram. What's the general rating of the show? Is it PG? Yeah.
My grandparents listen, but I'm sure they're open to hearing anything at this point.
No,
so whatever
it
got.
was a lot of fun. Like I said, a lot of drinking. We were in the off season, so naturally in that time, or certainly when I was playing, it was all about just going out and having a good time.
Yeah. Well, what was the culture like? Like, the word culture I find so interesting because I think nearly every football club in the AFL, in the local footy, they're pretty similar. A good culture is a team that wins and a bad culture is a team that's losing. And I think, even Melbourne this off-season, everyone's talking about their culture.
Yeah.
But if they had just won the flag as opposed to losing 2 finals, their culture's probably irrelevant.
Excuse me.
How did you find the word culture?
It's not tangible, right? So you can't measure it. You can't see it. It's a buzzword. And it's one of those things that all you can measure culture by is the result, the success. You're constantly driving performance, attitudes, behaviours to create a better culture. But all of the work that you put in, and every football club's doing this, is purely determined by the results that you get. So unfortunately, no matter what work you do off the field, what things you put in place, what, your team or your coaches are doing between the Monday to Saturday or Monday to Friday, it doesn't matter unless you're winning. And, you've got to put in a lot of hard work to win. It's not just the small behavioural, cultural things. It's so much time before that. Look, at the end of the day, it's easier to keep a winning culture than it is to create one. So teams that are going well, like Melbourne have been in recent years, it's certainly easier to maintain and keep a culture than it is to work to where they got to by winning that flag. So, with regards to how Melbourne are going at the moment, I mean, culturally, that can change because, if they win the flag this year, I can guarantee to everyone to say that Melbourne's got a great culture. So if they can go out, turn it around for the back half of the year, which I'm sure they will, I think things like a short-term cultural issue, they're quickly forgotten about. It's like a blink in the memory. It's a long-term thing, like, you know, your 2, 3, 4 years of shit performances. If there's a couple of incidents over an off-season or something like that, the best and easiest way to forget about it and move on and stop the media talking about it is go out there and win.
Couldn't agree more there. Cale, I really appreciate your time coming on tonight. I know you've got a lasagna to get home to.
Mate,
very important.
It's been great. You've reminded me of some fantastic memories. Some, like you showed earlier, not so good, but a lot of really good ones. And I don't do much of this these days, and I'm very selective. So I know you're an up-and-comer in the space. And as I said to you, I can't wait to look back. I'll tell people I was on the show. There'll be hundreds of thousands of followers, and I'll be right down the bottom as one of your first 3 or 4 on the show. So, mate, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. It's been an amazing insight.
Mate, love it. Thanks for having me.